Bill 22, the Animal Protection Amendment Act, was quietly introduced this spring during calving season. It passed all three readings in the Alberta legislature without a single opposing voice and received royal assent only a month and a half later. Here is the Minister of Alberta Agriculture, flanked by his partners from the Alberta ASPCA and the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association. None of them look very happy announcing their big achievement. Most farmers were not even aware of the bill before it passed, including some on the board of the Alberta Beef Producers. Alberta already had a perfectly good Animal Protection Act. Why did we need a new one? After reading the fine print of Bill 22 many times, I think the answer is right there in their own words. Here's the Minister of Agriculture describing what Bill 22 gives us. The amended Animal Protection Act gives us a 12-fold increase in fines, jail sentences, and prohibition orders. Prohibition orders can be issued without convictions or even charges being laid, and with any terms the judge decides to impose, including a lifetime ban on animal ownership. Here is the executive director of the SPCA. She looks a little happier here with her dog. The Alberta SPCA received a $2 million bonus from the Alberta government this spring, and she's pretty happy that they have hired 3 new people to help them get going with all the new procedures they're developing. Again, she says it right here in her newsletter. Bill 22 gives a lower threshold for intervention, more policing and enforcement powers, more penalties, and more inspection tools to be used against animal owners. Legislative overreach into livestock agriculture is part of a global push against cattle and eating meat. Bill C-293 was a federal bill that actually proposed to regulate or phase out animal agriculture and replace it with alternative proteins to help reduce pandemic risk. Luckily, this ridiculous bill died in the Senate in 2005. We in Alberta and Canada are experiencing a pattern. Governments are writing increasingly broad and draconian legislation. The courts never challenge the legislation once it's passed into law, and we the people lose more and more of our rights. Another thing is that once the acts are passed through the legislature, the government has the power to add an unlimited number of regulations, which are really just new laws that then become part of the act. I will show you this in more detail when we dig into Bill 22. These bills are generally framed as protecting something such as public health or the climate, or, in the case of Bill 22, animal welfare. But it's the wording of the legislation that matters, not what's promoted by the framing. The CFIA's Health of Animals Act is promoted as crucial to stop the spread of animal disease, to protect the food supply. But what the words say is that they can kill animals suspected of having a disease. No proof is required. Here is the actual Section 48 legislation. The CFIA can dispose of animals that are suspected of having been contaminated by a disease. They can also kill livestock that has been in close proximity to animals that were suspected of having or being contaminated by a disease. What happens when the government has the power to kill animals without proof of disease? Jason Smith was running a successful and healthy deer farm in central Alberta when it came under suspicion from the CFIA. CFIA inspection didn't detect any symptoms of chronic wasting disease in his herd, and they refused to allow live testing. Instead, they had the entire herd killed, after which testing showed that not a single deer had CWD. Funny how the Health of Animals Act isn't actually healthy for animals. Using this same eradication policy, the CFIA has wiped out about half the cervid farms in Canada since 2008. After all that killing, in 2012, the CFIA declared their culling and quarantine policy to be ineffective. CFIA admits that chronic wasting disease is now established in wild cervids in Saskatchewan and much of Alberta. Bizarrely, CFIA is still continuing the same ineffective eradication policy outside the prairie provinces, a policy they themselves declared to be ineffective back in 2012. Now we get to the wording in Bill 22. The original Animal Protection Act was clearly designed to protect animals from abuse and neglect, but in my opinion, the amendments may have changed that purpose. The goal is still framed as animal protection, But several new words and clauses suggest that the amended act might be designed for maximum control of livestock owners in the event of an animal disease outbreak. Before we dig into the wording of Bill 22, we need to get a bit of context from the CFIA's websites. Here again are words from the CFIA's Health of Animals Act. To reduce disease spread, they use quarantine, inspection, control, and culling. CFIA comes under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Health. The CFIA lists 4 key threats that they call diseases of concern. High pathogenicity avian influenza has been the basis of culling birds. We know what being a disease of concern has done for cervids under suspicion of chronic wasting disease. Foot and mouth disease affects cloven-hoofed animals, so cattle, bison, deer, pigs, sheep, and goats. Foot and mouth disease does not affect humans. It's highly contagious in an airborne way. FMD is endemic in Asia and Africa, and most animals recover, but with weakened health. In Canada, we have been free of FMD since 1952, but the CFIA says that an outbreak is more likely due to climate change. In Canada, we enjoy the status of being free of foot and mouth disease and not vaccinating for it. CFIA has prepared a response plan for an outbreak of foot and mouth disease. The plan involves killing all animals exposed to the disease, tracing and surveillance to find exposed animals, and quarantine and control of suspect animals. I don't know what the difference is between a suspect animal that gets quarantined and an exposed animal that gets killed. Based on what happened in England in 2001, the decontamination farmers have to do is extremely onerous. This is legislation the CFIA came out with last November for increased tracking and tracing for the types of animals affected by foot and mouth disease. This new regulation was to be part of the Health of Animals Act. It calls for increased reporting of births, deaths, and movement, and all data was to be kept in a centralized digital database. The stated goal is to respond to animal disease outbreaks. The CFIA has currently walked back on this legislation for cattle and bison due to farmer pushback. CFIA's plans also include vaccination to control the spread, and they are stockpiling foot and mouth disease vaccines. Once animals are vaccinated for foot and mouth disease, they can't be exported because it can never be proved that they don't carry the disease. Vaccinated animals have to be killed or quarantined for life. Therefore, mass vaccination would destroy the livestock industry in Alberta. The fear is that once the government has a stockpile of vaccines, they might want to use them. So now that we have the background from the CFIA and their preparations for disease outbreak, let's dig into the words in Alberta Bill 22 and see how the amended version differs from the original. In the next few slides, I'll compare the original version to the amended version in Bill 22. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm sure the lawyers who drafted all these laws know many more things about them than I have been able to discern from the wording, but I will just show you the things I noticed. Many things remain unchanged in the amended version of Alberta's Animal Protection Act. Peace officers can still take action based on their opinion that an animal is in distress. They can still come anywhere on your land, barns, or buildings, but they need a warrant to enter a private home. They still have the authority to cull animals without the need to get a court order or even an opinion from a vet. Owners must still pay for all costs of peace officer action, including seizure, culling, vet care, cleanup, and disinfection. Peace officers and vets are still free from all liability for their actions. What is different in the amended version? The thresholds for action have been lowered. The peace officer's opinion doesn't have to be probable anymore, just reasonable. Reasonable is not defined. The peace officer can now take action if he suspects that an animal might become distressed, and they can act not only to relieve distress, but also to prevent distress. Bill 22 includes many new potential causes for distress that might warrant action, and peace officers can now put animals in quarantine and direct and control their care. Some of these changes could conceivably be used in the event of a disease outbreak. For example, the new power of quarantine might be needed during an outbreak of disease. Could the danger that an animal might become sick be used as a justification for quarantine to prevent stress? Could vaccination be needed to prevent distress? Peace officers have significantly expanded powers of inspection. The original Animal Protection Act just allowed peace officers to inspect animals in vehicles or premises other than private homes. Now, peace officers can collect samples and test animals and their food and water. They can examine any and all records and documents and examine your computer hardware and software. The need for a warrant before entering a house is not changed, but now peace officers can demand that you bring any animals out of the house for inspection. There's also this strange requirement that everyone else in the family can be excluded when questioning a person, except the person could have a lawyer present. Another amendment is that no frivolous or vexatious complaints are allowed. There's a big increase in penalties for contravening orders or anything in the legislation. Fines have increased from $20,000 to $250,000, but the worst of it is that the fines can be charged per animal and per day. Imagine being charged $250,000 for each animal in your herd. In addition, an animal owner can now be required to pay back any supposed monetary benefits gained from the offense. Animal owners are still required to pay all costs for any action taken by peace officers, including the costs of having your animals taken into custody or quarantined, the costs for care, which might include medical care or vaccination, and even the costs of culling, disposal, and cleanup after your animals are killed. My understanding is that when England suffered their horrific foot and mouth outbreak in 2001, there was compensation for the costs of culling and cleanup. But Alberta's amended Animal Protection Act stipulates that farmers would have to pay for everything. Another really draconian aspect of Bill 22 is the new penalty of prohibition orders, which prohibit a person from owning or even living with animals. This can be for life or whatever the judge feels like putting in for terms and conditions of your particular prohibition order. Prohibition orders are enforced across Canada, so you won't be able to move to another province if you want to care for animals again. I found this hard to believe, but here is the Minister of Agriculture saying it himself when he introduced Bill 22. Peace officers can issue prohibition orders without charges or convictions in a court. To reiterate, these draconian prohibition orders can include a lifetime ban on owning or living with animals, all without a charge or conviction. I find it difficult to imagine that an animal lover, like the executive director of the Alberta ASPCA, could support such an inhumane prohibition order before charges are even laid. A prohibition order is a loss of rights. Peace officers can enter your home without a warrant, and they have to know where you're living at all times. If they decide to allow you to live with an animal, they get to control the medical treatments the animal receives, which could be drugs or vaccinations you don't want your animal to have. So some of the amendments in Bill 22 suggest the Alberta Animal Protection Amendment Act might be more about limiting the spread of livestock disease than about protecting pets from abuse. Nothing in the amended act excludes livestock. But why would they need another set of livestock when we are already covered by so many laws? I've already talked about the CFIA's Health of Animals Act, which is used to kill animals without proof of disease. We also have the Alberta Animal Health Act. Both of these acts on the right, one federal and one provincial, are for the purpose of reducing the spread of animal disease. Why would we need any sneaky new provisions for disease control in the Alberta Animal Protection Amendment Act when we are already covered by two existing laws with animal disease control as their declared intention? The next few slides, I'm going to compare these four acts and see if we can figure out the question we're all wondering. Why do we need Bill 22? I'm showing the two Abuse or Distress Acts on the left and the two Disease Acts on the right. Bill 22 is in the column showing mostly red on this slide. The Chief Inspectors for Distress are peace officers, and the Chief Inspectors for Disease Control are vets. In comparing the two Disease Control Acts on the right, I found that Bill 22 shares many of the draconian aspects of the CFIA's federal act, and both of them are generally more draconian than Alberta's Animal Health Act. Here, for example, the CFIA legislation and Bill 22 both have dropped the need for opinions to be based on probable grounds. As we saw earlier, Bill 22 is the only act that allows for action based on potential future distress, rather than existing disease or distress. And the goal of action is not only to relieve distress, but to prevent it. Bill 22 shares many similarities to the Animal Disease Acts. The three acts on the right all share the power to quarantine and direct animal care. Here again, the powers of inspection in Bill 22 look more like the Animal Disease Acts and not at all like the original Animal Protection Act. Bill 22 even allows for testing of animal food and water. Why would this be necessary for a case of animal abuse or neglect? The Animal Disease Acts allow for quarantine and control zones, something not present in Bill 22. Where Bill 22 really differs from the Animal Disease Acts, though, is that with Bill 22, animal owners are much more on the hook for all costs and liabilities. Under the animal abuse laws on the left, animal owners are stuck paying for all the costs of government action against them. For the Disease Acts on the right, animal owners don't have to pay all the costs unless they have committed an offense. In terms of fines and penalties, once again, the amendments in Bill 22 have turned this animal abuse law into something that looks more like the Animal Disease Control Acts, with much more severe fines and even jail terms. But Bill 22 still contains by far the most outrageous penalties of all the four acts. The prohibition orders and exorbitant fines per animal are unique to Bill 22. The Disease Control Acts allow for some compensation for government actions, but Bill 22 does not. The animal owner has to pay all the costs with no compensation. Each one of these acts comes with a final section of what are called regulations. This is where the government can add as many extra laws as it wants, covering any aspect of the act with any terms and conditions. There are already 27 new regulations in the amended Animal Protection Act. They are in the process of writing more, and Bill 22 won't be proclaimed into law until they finish writing the new regulations. Notice that the last regulation is always giving the government permission to write as many more regulations as they desire. We concerned citizens in Alberta have not been able to get a finished copy of Bill 22, and we assume it's because even though it's been passed into law, they're still writing more regulations. Who votes on the new regulations? I've highlighted Regulation 15Q in the amended Animal Protection Act. This says that the minister can make regulations respecting the care of animals. Next, we will see where we are going to get those new regulations. The new Federal Code of Practice for the Safe Care and Handling of Beef Cattle contains 78 new requirements that will become new regulations in provincial animal protection laws. The code was drafted by the National Farm Animal Care Council, or NFAC. NFAC has many partners, including the CFIA and the World Organization for Animal Health, or WOA. Both the CFIA and WOA align with the UN's One Health policy, which advocates for reduced meat consumption. Farmers are experts in livestock care, and the majority of the 78 requirements in the updated code are cattle care practices that most farmers practice as a matter of course, without need for bureaucratic instruction. The most concerning is the requirement for a veterinary client-patient relationship, or VCPR. A VCPR means that an animal owner must let a licensed veterinarian take over decisions about the medical care and treatment of his or her animals. This could mean forced vaccination or treatment against a farmer's wishes. This regulation could ensure mass vaccination for foot and mouth disease or for any other reason. To sum up, Bill 22 is different from the original Animal Protection Act in that it allows for quarantine and control of care, and the fines and penalties seem far out of line with the case of animal abuse or neglect. The amendments make Bill 22 look more like an Animal Disease Control Act. Bill 22 is distinguished from the federal and provincial Animal Control Acts by the draconian fines, penalties, and prohibition orders. The one thing that seems truly unique about Bill 22 is this stipulation about preventing future distress. What is the implications of Bill 22 and other acts that are supposedly for animal protection and animal health? More power for governments, courts, and police, and less power for us. The amended Bill 22, along with the Alberta and Federal Disease Control Acts, will make it more difficult for family farms to survive a declared animal disease. We are demanding that the Alberta government rescind Bill 22. We want them to understand that cattle and livestock agriculture are vital to all Alberta families and communities.